guess I'll get started. Hey all, my name is Eva. I'm a preservation specialist with NEDCC, and I have an awesome cold, so I apologize in advance. I will be a little bit croaky today. I'm sure by tomorrow afternoon when everything's over, I'll be totally all healed and better, because that's how things always are. But thanks for coming in this afternoon. I know you just finished lunch, so maybe we're all a little bit sleepy, but we'll go kind of easy on you this afternoon. I just want to talk about disaster preparedness and writing a plan in a pretty simple way. You've got two templates in front of you. We're going to walk through them, but first I'm going to talk a little kind of introductory theory at you, and then we'll go through all those resources. Like I said, I'm a preservation specialist. I work for NEDCC, Northeast Document Conservation Center. We are located in Andover, Massachusetts. We're not just Northeast, we're international. It's not just documents. We do photos and audio and teaching. I'm not a conservator. I think that's all it's a historic name that we don't, it's kind of grown past that. But basically, we're funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities to be a resource. So if you're working on projects, or you have questions about grants, or really about anything, you can call or email us. That's what we're here for. So make sure you get a card. We'll talk about some of the resources in your packet. Hi there. Grab a packet in the back there. There's some information in the folders. And our website's full of preservation information, full of funding information. We're here to be a resource, so please don't hold back. Here's my agenda. It's actually kind of a lot to fit into an hour and a half that we have here. Hi, come on in, grab a folder in the back. There's some templates. So I'm going to kind of pack it in here, but if you would like a copy of the slides, there's going to be a recording on the SHN portal, but you can also email me. I'm happy to send you slides, direct links, read the plan that you already have, whatever. So make sure you get my card and we can touch base later. So we're going to talk about what disasters mean for libraries, archives, cultural heritage collections. I think keep that at the forefront here. We're not really talking as much about business continuity or human safety. Those are elements that maybe your local FEMA manager could talk to you about. I'm going to talk more about your wet artifacts and books and paper today. And I'm not used to this updated interface. We have the old version of PowerPoint, so this is it's nice. Okay. So disaster planning can be kind of a touchy subject because it's one of these things that you're like, oh, we should all be aware of this and know what our risks are, but also we have to think about our patrons, and also we have to write a new policy, and there's a board meeting next week, and you kind of have other things to worry about. It can seem like this big looming responsibility, and you're not sure where to start. So I want to take today to kind of demystify those ideas, thinking not just about these kind of natural disasters on the huge scale of this is from Hurricane Irene. We have those scale disasters. We also have smaller incidents. You have a broken window, you have a pipe break, whatever, you have a hard drive crash. Those count as disasters too. So I'm going to kind of be addressing all those things. So we think, like I was saying, about natural disasters, wildfires, ice storms, these kind of things. In New England, we think about freezing pipes. That's a major, major concern for us. But we also, flooding affects everyone. We like to say that every disaster is also a water disaster because no matter what, there's often a water component. Here's a mold outbreak in an office, earthquake damage. And this is just the issue of some compressed data that got corrupted. That can also count as a disaster. So we use this language kind of broadly, but you can be official. We often will get a phone call from someone who's like, hi, I've got this box of moldy books, and I don't know if I should try and donate it somewhere or get it cleaned, and they didn't really care at my office, so we just have it sitting on the table, and I'm like, let's call it a disaster. Let's get formal about this, because we get to take these things quite seriously. These are our collections, this is our heritage, so we get to be really formal about it. To the point of the corrupted data, you can also have human disasters. You can have a patron become sick. You can have a vandalism incident. We have different kinds of terrorism, local terrorism, cyber terrorism. So these are considerations to sort of include in our planning. The unifying thing about all of these issues, big or small, is that disasters are sudden. They are unexpected incidents. And like I was saying, you're already quite busy with budgets and patrons and projects. So what we want to do is be prepared for a range of incidents. So you're sort of we're going to talk about kind of knowing your biggest risks and how to prepare. We'll walk through some ideas about that because you don't want to sit around and worry about what might happen. This isn't like a fear-mongering thing. We just want to be ready for whatever might happen. Lots of different ways to categorize disasters, lots of different sort of approaches here. These are UNESCO's guidelines that we like to use because we're thinking again from a cultural heritage point of view. They divide their categories into two sort of areas, natural and man-made. It's kind of one nice, easy way to approach this topic. If you start to look around online, there's lots of resources, lots of different approaches. This is just the one we're going to do today. So following sort of the mindset of UNESCO's guidelines here, we're thinking natural first. These photographs, let's see, that's an infestation, a bug infestation. It's a book louse. And up here, somebody put a little homemade bomb into the mailbox in front of the Historical Society, which is pretty sad, right? So it's pretty unnecessary. An infestation can count as a disaster also. Even if it's just like a bad housekeeping thing, that can sort of be within our consideration. So we're thinking large and small scale for both of these. Man-made can have a lot of the similar kind of concerns like water or fire, but there's generally kind of a litigation or insurance aspect that might be quite different from a natural disaster. And this is often where our sort of human disasters are going to be categorized as well. I would say, as a side note to the infestation thing, because I often get a question about that, if you're having a little outbreak of bugs or you're noticing some frass or some destruction, we don't want to just set off pesticides, set off bug spray, interior especially. It's not good for our collections. It's not good for paper or wood. So if you're having an incident with some insects, there are tools I can recommend to you, but just don't start spraying pesticides around. Even like right around the outside of your building, it's quite bad for our natural materials like wood and leather. So a little caveat about that. Okay, and this is kind of the big picture theory stuff, so I want to get past it so we can really talk more specifically about your plan. I want to talk through quickly these kind of phases of emergency management. These are going to introduce planning, roles, and supplies that we might consider in our emergency preparedness. I can say emergency preparedness, I can say disaster planning, I can say disaster prep, all these words, they can all mean the same thing. Different industries might say one. Your FEMA local emergency manager might say emergency preparedness, whereas your librarian might say disaster planning. It's all the same thing. That's okay. So here's a visual to kind of understand the phases that we're going to talk through here. Risk assessment is kind of an ongoing, it kind of hovers above this, but it's also part of your mitigation and prevention. So risk assessment's about knowing your collections, knowing your building, and sort of considering what possible issues might occur and how they would affect you. So we'll walk through that. Mitigation's really the cornerstone of all this because we want to find out our concerns, our risks before something happens and take care of it as much as possible. So if we know we have a leak in the roof, let's take care of that before there's an ice storm. The idea is that through effective mitigation practices, you can really lessen the incidents, the chance of incidents, or the damage occurred during an incident. Preparedness, that's where our plans and our procedures, that what we're doing to minimize damage and to save lives really comes into play. Response are these actions that we're taking to take stock of the situation, start to initiate your disaster plan, do search and rescue. And then recovery is the actions that are restoring your materials and your community back to normal. Recovery can be quite a long period. It could take a few weeks, it could take a few years. So we'll talk about these two steps kind of side by side. But let's start with risk assessment. This is going to be your foundation of emergency management, and it involves a few things. Let's see here. So in your folder, somewhere, you'll see a page of resources with links. A lot of those references are going to be coming up in our slideshow also. So as you're going through those considerations, I do think it's nice to reflect back to the slides, just sort of side note. Particularly with, and I also brought some of these examples up here to look at afterwards, with things like risk assessment, we have kind of exercises that are in place around that in the field, so there's some good things to look up here. So in risk management, we are identifying possible hazards, both natural hazards and man-made hazards. We're going to think about the vulnerability of our collections, and we're going to think about the impact that a given disaster may have on our collection. Again, this is not like a one-and-done exercise. This is going to be ongoing because your buildings are in constant fluctuation, your collections change, your usage changes, the environment, as we know, is changing. We have different weather kind of patterns every year. It seems like now everyone's at risk of hurricanes, it turns out. So we need to keep up with those. It's kind of a constant vigilance thing. So we'll walk through some steps of that, but this is your cornerstone within kind of the mitigation phase. Who's involved? Kind of a lot of people. We want really as much help as possible, and this is going to be reflective of the entire disaster planning process. It shouldn't just be you. You know, even if you are the only archivist in your institution, or you're the head of the volunteers, but you're the only one who actually shows up to meetings. You want a team around this. And so the second part of the talk, when we're looking at the templates, we're going to talk a lot about team and roles and who you can force them to help you out, I guess. Because we're looking for our custodial staff, we're looking for administration, we're looking for building maintenance, building managers, insurance agents, conservators, anybody that you can call on who's going to have some expertise that can be put into play here. That may also include people outside of your own institution or your own organization. It could be people who have a similar role to play the next town over. Or maybe there is a tribal association that you can rely on to have a series of meetings about this. We'll talk about this idea of doing some outreach and some kind of local network building. Whether that's a town administrator, a municipal role, or again, those emergency managers. And then why is sort of kind of the obvious one, I think, but it's important to state it formally. So if you're making the case to your board or your administration to say, we need to do this, well, we do it to reduce the risk of damage and the weight of that damage during an incident. So here's a simple matrix for assessing some possible risk assessments for your institution. And this is pretty straightforward, and it's an exercise you can do easily. It's a nice, like a round table exercise. If you're having a meeting and you've got your volunteers or your board there, and you're like, okay, if we have a flood, what's it going to do to our building and to our collections? How does that, are you in an older building that's on the bank of a river and all your collections are stored in the basement? If so, the chance of a flood is probably going to have a high effect on your collections. So we want to think about the probability of having an event. So flood or fire. Fire, pretty much everyone has the probability of it happening at some point, right? But is it a wooden building or a brick building or concrete? And you don't have to get too fancy with this. It's just kind of a nice discussion exercise that I recommend doing with your staff or your organization. There are simple things like a leak or somebody brings back books and they're wet or dirty. That's probably really likely, but it's going to have a low effect on your collections. I can't take credit for it, did not design it, but it's a really good tool, so I share it a lot. Here's a much more detailed version of that matrix. This is from Heritage Preservation, who now has disbanded, and part of them is under FEMA, and part of them is under the American Institute for Conservation. But the materials are still available online, and I have a couple of them to show, and you can still look them up and find their resources. This is like a 5-page document that, again, the link is here, but it's also, I think, listed in your resources. I meant to put it in there if I didn't. You can email me for me if I didn't. And this gets way more detailed. Your risk of volcanic activity may be very high, but probably not, right? It's probably one of the lower ones, depending on where you are in the country. Again, you can use this as a basis for a meeting. Print a couple out, sit down, talk through it with people, and figure out, okay, these guys are likely, heavy snow, high winds, maybe up in the mountains, very likely. What's it going to do to us? And just work through it. It's a good exercise. From these risks that we identify, whether they're low or high, we're going to start to see a sense of like, well, maybe this is a big risk, so that becomes a priority. That's how we're going to organize our mitigation activities. If we know that flooding is a big risk, let's take steps to get all the materials up off the ground, to have some absorbent materials ready, mops, buckets, those long absorbent snakes. Side note, if you want some help talking about supplies for disaster preparedness, we can talk about that afterwards too. But this is helping you figure out what you should do first to protect your collections. So like I was saying, biggest concern's probably going to be water and fire. So starting with water, we want to know where our water risks are. Where are the water sources around your collections? Do you have a kitchen in your building? Do you have bathrooms next to your storage room? Do you have, the maintenance closet has a sink in it and it's also right next to your storage area? Just being aware of where things are located in your building. We like to say that everything should be 4 inches off the ground. Even your bottom shelf of all your books or whatever should be 4 inches off the ground. There's kind of a safe rule for leaks, floods, any kind of creeping water. If you know that you have an area that leaks, maybe the back door always leaks, or there's a certain weak part in the roof that's always leaking in the spring or whatever, you should monitor it. And there are really affordable water alarms you can get, battery powered. They're like $35, and you can put them in place. The thing is, you want to kind of have some programming around that, so that if you take the trouble to identify a leak, try to repair it, buy a water alarm, put up the water alarm there, tell everyone else in your building that there's a water alarm. So if they hear something, they're going to go do something about it. Too often these water alarms are going off during the night, or it's a Saturday morning, and the maintenance guy is like, yeah, I heard something, but no one told me there was a new alarm system. So, do some outreach around these steps that you're taking. Again, you don't want to be doing all this planning and work in a vacuum. Fire risks, pretty obvious too, right? Our historic collections are made up of things that like to burn: paper, wood, those burn really well, fabric, cloth, all excellent fuels for fire. So we want to be extra cautious. When we talk to fire professionals, we'll hear them talk about libraries are like rooms and buildings full of kindling. They're really concerned about how much opportunity we're creating for fire. So, if you're in a historic structure though, or you're a small institution, you probably don't have really high level fire suppression. You may not have a chemical drop. You may not have sprinklers. That's okay. Those systems are expensive and you need to maintain them. So knowing what your risks are and finding out what has been done and what can be done to mitigate those risks, that's what we're all about. If you're not sure what you have, this is going to be a big part of the second piece when we're talking about our disaster plan template. But if you don't know if you have sprinklers or what kind they are, or does someone change the fire extinguishers, it's really worth finding out. Do a little sort of self-research project. Talk to the custodian, if you're a town organization or a municipal organization, you may have the highway department who comes around once a year and checks the extinguishers. Go talk to those guys, figure out who's in charge of this and what are the rules so that you have more information. They'll also be excited that you care and they'll want to share that information with you. We'll talk more about that too. All right, so mitigation here, we're going to kind of walk through this step, the walkthrough of course being the first step. Walkthroughs are one of these opportunities to see your building with new eyes, and this should be a really regular planned event. It's not just like every morning you kind of pull into the parking lot and the back wall is cracked. We don't really look at it because every single morning you pull into the parking lot, you see it. That's how slow disasters happen over time. You're not seeing it every day in this concerned viewpoint. So take an opportunity to really notice things. Look at your ceiling tiles. Look for seepage or leaks or smells. Look in that weird closet. Go in the basement, even though I know the basement's weird and dirty. I get that a lot, that people are like, oh, well, we don't really use that room. Well, go look at it. See how it is, Too often when I'm visiting somewhere and we're doing a walkthrough, because it's a great thing to start a day with, I almost always start with a walkthrough, we find stuff. Or I'll ask a question and they're like, oh, I don't know. Or there'll be like a chimney in the reading room and I'm like, oh, is that chimney open? And they're like, what? We go look up it and it's like this huge, it's open, fresh air coming in. So, take the opportunity to do a walkthrough, looking at your fire exits, looking for boxes sitting on the ground, looking for things stacked on top of the radiator or right in front of the air ducts, right under the sprinklers. These are things to look out for. Again, mitigation is an ongoing task, so taking care of your building, doing an annual roof inspection, those are really important tasks that you're already probably accomplishing. You are already doing really important disaster preparedness. And obviously changing the fire alarm batteries and checking the fire extinguishers, those are a big part of that. But also things like checking the drains, repairing those cracks in the walls or whatever. inspecting your windows, make sure the windows open and close and nothing kind of falls out when you do open and close them. Those are all important steps that you're probably already doing, so you get to acknowledge that you're doing it and then continue it in a more programmatic way. We like to say that the building is the first line of defense for your museum or for your collections, so you need to take care of it. So before you get into a disaster response or planning activity, you really, ideally you're going to have some strong collections management policies in place. And I do feel like no matter what subject I'm talking about, I'm actually talking about collections management. You have to know what you have to know where it is, you have to know how it is. So inventories, condition reports, shelf lists, all those things are as important to your fire safety as an extinguisher, which I know sounds crazy, but it really is. You need to have that intellectual control in place first. A well-documented collection in a secure location is at much less risk than an unknown quantity of boxes in multiple locations, right? We can't do a lot of our assessing and priorities and decision making if we don't have the full picture. So it's hard to say where our most important items are if you don't have a full location guide. It's hard to say the things that are at the most risk without knowing how everything is doing. Digital disaster preparedness is a big piece of this. We talk a lot about digital preservation and access decisions. Your digital disasters may be something simple like, a hard drive crash locally, but you've got server backups, or it could be a security breach, like a hacker situation that's getting more and more common. Thinking about backups of catalogs, inventories, personnel records, this kind of gets into the business continuity area that I'm not really touching on, but there's this question of if all your computers go down because of a power outage or because of a security issue, whatever it may be, do you have backups and how can you access them? Do you have databases that are crucial to your everyday operations? If it's the only copy of your record sitting somewhere and it's on a thumb drive that you back up and take home every night, that is not digital preservation, and I'm not really secure with that backup methodology. I am happy to talk more about digital preservation and those kind of strategies towards the end of this. I'm going to hopefully leave some time so we can just talk about whatever open questions you might have, but that falls under your disaster preparedness too. No one tells you, like in library school or museum school, that you'll be talking about data backups and fire extinguishers and mold remediation. Nobody tells you that, but we have these jobs that you become in charge of everything. I'm sure you all have that experience where you're like, wow, it's all interconnected and I have to take care of all of it. And this is part of that. All right, moving on to preparedness. Remember our graphic, we're kind of moving around our graphic from mitigation, preparedness, we're coming around here. The first step is to organize yourself and some of your community or your staff into a committee or a team to focus on your disaster planning. We'll talk about this with a template, but it may just be you and the custodian, and that's okay. It's a good place to start. Maybe it's the members of your board because they are really excited about it, but they're not actually going to show up in the middle of the night if the pipes burst. So you're going to have a backup team. We'll talk about kind of roles and authority and knowing who's going to be a really good player for you. It's a really hyper-local thing. You're going to have local politics in place. Everyone does. But thinking about who has knowledge that will be useful to you, whether it's a curator or a historian or the roof guy, those people are all going to have a role to play. For preparedness, really your disaster plan is this phase. It's pretty straightforward because it has all your information in it. A trained staff who's armed with procedures and they've been practicing and they know how to react, that's your best preparation. That's the whole of it. That'll be the focus of today, so we'll talk about this a lot in a few minutes. In addition to disaster plans, though, like you have in front of you, I want to talk about quick response guides, flip charts, cheat sheets. These also have a couple of names. Does anybody have something like this, like a poster or a little guide that has your phone tree? Anybody have this kind of thing? Yeah? A lot of academic institutions have it. A lot of rec centers or museums, public-facing institutions have them. This can be something that you make in an hour in your office. It could be a plastic ring with laminated half sheets of information. It can be a poster. It's not your whole disaster plan. It's just a representation of some basic steps. You might have a pamphlet. I see a lot of like fold-out laminated pamphlets. That's a good one too. The idea is that you've got a list of kind of possible emergency scenarios or risks. So you've got a page for flood, a page for fire, a page for sick patron. It's really, really simple. And the steps are going to be like, 1, stay calm. 2, call 911 or call your local emergency phone number, whichever it may be. Or 3, here's the insurance company's information. Really basic, bare bones pieces of information here. This is not a full plan. It may seem kind of simplistic. It's actually, you know, if it says stay calm, call 911, you're kind of like, duh, I know how to do that. But when you're in this chaotic situation, it can be really relieving to grab a tool and it says, go do this. If you have a shooter situation, it's going to tell you to stay low or stay out of the building, or there'll be steps in there that are, your brain knows them, but you're trying to react and you go into panic mode. So it's a nice tool to grab. I see them as a nice first step also. If your committee can't get it together to have the disaster plan ready yet, this is an easy place to start. You can even make this and take this to your team and say, look, here's what we're talking about. Now, these can have multiple copies of this. You might have one at your circulation desk and one in the back office. You may have one on each floor of your building. They're going to be public facing, so you don't have the company credit card phone number or credit card number in there. You're not going to maybe have people's personal information in there because maybe the public can access this. The National Park Service calls theirs a flip chart, so I put that name up there. Here's 2 more images of them. It's just so when you're freaking out, you grab something that tells you what to do. This definitely is an example of something that exists often. It may already be around in your office. You may have one in a drawer and it's like 10 years old. You're not really sure who made it. That's okay. Double check the phone numbers, update the floor plan, print out a couple copies. That's a great place to start. I think a lot of what we'll talk about today, you already have in some shape or some form. You just want to put them together into a single resource. Because too often these tools and these discussions happen, people work really hard on it, and then it like gets put in a drawer, or you get a new job, or whatever happens, and all that kind of effort goes away into a vacuum, and that's no good. Oh, you can put a floor plan in here if you want. You may have floor plans, again, if you're in a public-facing building, you may have floor plans posted on each floor by the elevator or something, but this is a place you may want to have that as well. Okay, so, and then sort of wrapping up preparedness still, once you start to get some policies and tools in place, you need to train your staff and your volunteers around them. Familiarizing your team with all your good efforts, again, we want to sort of let people know ahead of the disaster, ahead of the event, how we're going to react, what policies are in place. You don't want people losing control and duplicating efforts you've already taken the time to think through. So we're going to train around our tools. Here's some topics that we like to focus on. I think that training is kind of an activity with your disaster plan. You know, once you get all your information, we're going to put together our binder or whatever it may be. We want to start building some good relationships with our first responders, with our volunteers, let our administrators see that we're doing all this good work. All that outreach and communication is part of this preparedness phase. So there's 2 kind of bonuses to taking your disaster plan and training your volunteers with it. One, like I was just saying, familiarizes everyone with it. 2, it'll expose some weaknesses in your plan. You know, you may think through it and you've got this whole plan you put together, but going through the situations, doing some practices will reveal, oh, I forgot about this. Or, you know, you do a test run and you find out that the alarm only goes off on the first floor, not on the second floor. That actually happens all the time to us. We find out that fire alarms aren't synced up in different parts of buildings. It's really weird. So we like to do these types of drills. First aid can be part of this, depending on how capable your staff is and if you have someone to instruct around that. But definitely being aware of how your building works, where equipment and information is. We'll talk about this in your disaster plan, but knowing how to turn off the water, knowing how to turn off the gas. We don't want someone, you know, if there's a leak in the window, flying off the handle and shutting off the gas. But if there's an incident going on, it's helpful to have more than one person with sort of basic facilities information. And then collections care. We'll talk about this sort of in salvage mode. So after the event, how do we dry our books and papers? How do we restore the materials that got damaged? And we'll talk about that a little bit. So lots of different methods for training, different sort of learning and teaching styles. I think face-to-face training is really important, doing some hands-on, whether it's a demonstration, whether it's through conferences like this. We see great training opportunities as like a pre-conference workshop or whatever. You can do, of course, fire drills. Oh yeah, who here does a fire drill in their building? One. That is always the answer when I ask that question. People don't do fire drills. And I feel like when we grew up, you always had to do fire drills, like all the time. People don't do them anymore. It's terrible. Like college dorms do them, and that's it. So I think I'm leading a revival of fire drills across America because it's really, people don't do them anymore. And it's really, I know it's kind of silly, like everyone get up, like interrupt your work for 15 minutes and go walk outside. But if you have a new hire or new volunteers, or if you have student workers who change every quarter, they don't know where the exits are. And if you're working like down in a basement behind a stack of boxes, or you're up in the attic, you need to know how long it's going to take you to get outside the building and far enough outside the building. That's the other thing, is that people do fire drills and they like all get down to the lobby. And they're like, all right, that is not escaping the incident. You need to like get off the property. So doing the fire drill kind of plus, we are seeing, definitely on academic kind of college campus situations, we do see more like shooter drills, shelter-in-place drills. Those are getting, unfortunately, more popular, sort of different circumstances that you'd want your student body to respond to. Again, for staff, though, or for volunteers in an organization, if you guys host a lot of social events in your cultural building, you should be doing fire drills in there, because if there's families all over the place and you've got senior citizens on the second floor and kids in the basement, that's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different speeds of people. So do some practices around that. Of course, presentations like this are great. I'm just going to load you up with information, but I do think some hands-on, some face-to-face real demonstrations, doing some wet salvage. We were just talking about this earlier. A wet salvage workshop means this is actually a fun one to set up because it kind of, people get upset. I'll have a couple of buckets of water and we'll all come together and I'll just start putting books in the water and getting them all ruined and putting photographs, we'll bring in old historic stuff and put it in the water and people get real freaked out. And it's okay, the things can get wet, we'll bring them back. But having that hands-on experience, it's important. It really is a confidence builder. Holding a wet book is a strange, sad thing. If you experience it now in a safe space before you're before you're doing it in a flooded garage or in a flooded basement. There are also regional organizations that do a lot of training around this. If you're part of a local library consortium or a regional preservation network, those kind of organizations can set up training. If you're not, you can set that up. Is anyone here part of a consortia or a regional alliance? Great, okay, one. So far you're winning, I think. So you can start one. You get to be in charge of your local preservation network or your local emergency response network. It means talking to other people in your community and in your region who might have historic artifacts, who might have questions about this. Call them up, set up a meeting, talk to someone who's in your position the next town over, the next tribe over, in the next university, whatever it may be. And say, hey, do you have these questions, or do you guys do this? Here's what we do. Set up, every 6 months you get together and do some kind of workshop together, or you read articles and share them. You can be in charge of your own local network. That is my small scale outreach pitch. And then of course, talking to your local first responders. They'll come in and do a walkthrough of your building and talk about fire risks and mitigation. Your insurance agent will come and do a building walkthrough with you. It's nice to talk to whoever your police, fire, whoever your emergency responder is going to be, have that phone call, have that in person so your volunteers and staff can meet them. I think it really is, again, a confidence builder so that they know who's going to show up when they call for help. We talked about building walkthroughs. In the kind of mitigation stage, but as part of your training, I think it's often that we'll find that when you're doing a fire drill or something, you find out that a door doesn't work, or that your fire doors actually don't close, or this was in a library, really hard to escape through that door during a fire. You just want to keep an eye, look at your exits, look at your points of egress, look at your windows, and be aware of what might add to a dangerous situation. Having emergency supplies on hand with staff who know how to use them is a very important part of your emergency prep. A simple mop and bucket can be a really good start to your disaster kit. That's a really good start. And a flashlight. That takes you up a notch. You can spend as much money and time as you want on your disaster supplies. You can go online and buy like $500 kits that have food and clothing and prepper stuff. We're going to talk about that more in a few minutes, but you don't have to do that. We like to think about a disaster kit that can be made. Often if I'm traveling to teach about disasters, I will only get my supplies from the closest like Walmart or gas station or grocery store that I can find, because that's where you're going to be going when the disaster actually hits. So can you find plastic gloves? Can you find some kind of like absorbent fabric? Ziploc bags, totally important part of your disaster kit. I try to keep it kind of more real world, and you'll see a list of possible things to add to your kit. If someone wants to fund really nice disaster kits for you and get you like a wet dry vac, great, let them. But don't let that be the scary big expense that's holding you back. So that's kind of our list for preparedness, right? Here's all the steps we just talked about for our preparing for any kind of disaster. Completing the plan, of course, and we'll talk through more of that. September is National Preparedness Month, so you've missed it, but that's okay. It's run by the federal agencies. They'll do it again next year. Their website is ready.gov, like ready.gov. They always do special handouts and webinars and flyers. That is about human emergencies, not just collection emergencies. So a lot of that's going to be having canned food and extra water, but there are a lot of overlapping concerns and really good solutions on there. So I recommend people look at it. If you're planning some kind of event or outreach with your community, it can be a nice way to pair up talking about personal safety and collections or artifact safety. We can have that kind of two-topic afternoon or a talk or something. I talked about response and recovery. I'm going to talk this at the same time often because they can overlap. Your immediate response might be things like addressing the immediate threats and stabilizing the situation. Recovery are the ongoing activities that are going to return your organization back to normal. So depending on your emergency, these things can overlap, and recovery can go on for quite some time. Your response activities will be guided by your disaster plan. All your thinking and planning is going to help you know how to proceed when something does happen. But, obviously the first things to be aware of is that in a dangerous situation, your personal safety is what matters the most. Your patrons, your community, that personal safety comes first. And secondly, we have to always heed to our emergency responders. You may not be allowed back inside your building for 48 hours, 72 hours. That it happens if there's a major incident or if the road gets washed out or something. So you may not be the first person on the scene. You have to wait for permission to enter your building. So I just have to say, I always remind people, and sometimes it's like with the archivist or with our curators, it's hard to remind them that in case of an emergency, you have to take care of yourself first. Don't go taking paintings off the walls and get into your storage. So personal safety, then property stabilization. Is your building safe to be inside? And then collections and preservation. So I'll walk through response here in 3 phases, assessment, review, and planning. This is a little bit theoretical, but I think it's a worthwhile kind of construct. We'll think through it, kind of get it in your head. You don't have to, when there's something, the shelves are on fire in front of you, don't think all right, let's assess this situation. You're going to be doing it already. So the first thing you'll do is assess your situation, right? You want to get a handle on exactly what you're dealing with. Depending on what the emergency is, you're going to have different approaches to responding. So if you are locking up one night after an event and you see a leaky window, you're probably not going to call 911, right? You're not going to call the president of your organization, shut down the facility. But if the fire marshal calls your house during the middle of the night, then it's quite a different scenario. Similarly, if you have a sick patron in your organization, maybe you can refer to your disaster plan for some quick guidance. You know who to call with a question. But if you have an intruder or a shooter situation, you have to remove yourself from the area and let the authorities handle it. You'll be thinking about that immediate risk factor and then considering who might be affected. Who is around? Who needs to know about this? Who's inside the building? Who's not inside? Who's outside is going to want to know about this? Do you need to call an administrator, call your insurance agent? A lot of states have like blanket insurance policies for emergencies in their libraries and certain public facilities. So if you're part of any kind of municipal entity or you get municipal funding, it's worth finding out. I was giving a talk in Connecticut to some town clerks, 96 town clerks in this room, and someone mentioned, oh yeah, we have a standing contract with this salvage vendor, but if you have a flood, you have to call them first. And most of the room didn't know. And like the state had written some bill that promised funding, and they had no idea. So find out if you are already part of any kind of benefit or consortial agreement. It's just good to ask, because sometimes some old policy is sitting in a drawer somewhere, and it might actually be helping you out. So thinking about, do you need to call an administrator or an insurance agent? Our next step is going to be reviewing our disaster plan. What have you done to prepare for this, and how are you going to coordinate that response? How are you ensuring the safety of yourself and your volunteers? Again, so we have our phone tree here, something that probably exists already in your institution. You may have a list of important people and phone numbers. That's a thing that already exists. You can put in your disaster plan, check that off. Again, knowing if you have existing contracts in place, there's a lot to think about in an emergency situation. And the idea is that the answers to these questions are going to be in your disaster plan already. This is a very, very common sight during spring thaw for us, for anybody in cold areas, right, when the pipes start to burst. We'll think about our supplies. What supplies have you bought? What do you have in place? Did you buy enough of them? Do you have some extra lights but no extra batteries, or is there a wet dry vac you've borrowed? These kind of things to be aware of. Collection priority, we talked about, do you know that during an emergency your most valuable items are going to be in a certain room, or the things that are most susceptible to water damage need to go out first? Those kind of collection priority considerations are going to be important, and that comes back to our collections management, right? And then we're reacting. Again, these are steps set up for the point of an educational discourse. You're not going to say, first, look at our phone tree. Now, pick up the phone. Like, we're going to be just acting, and you may have one person checking your supplies, and one person is calling the board, and someone else is going out to talk to neighboring institutions, and that's fine. All those roles will be in place and happening simultaneously. That's okay. We just want to understand that there are multiple responsibilities during an emergency, and you can get to each part as best you can. So making some short-term decisions, making some long-term decisions, thinking about calling the fire department, calling your insurance company, turning off the water to stop a leaky pipe. These are immediate decisions that affect your short-term recovery, I would say. Getting your backup server going, getting the roof repaired. These are a little bit longer-term recovery priorities. Getting a grant to have conservation work done on a photograph that got damaged, that's going to be much longer term recovery. And that's okay. These priorities are going to sort of help you get through that list of things to take care of. Reporting is going to be part of this. Reporting to your administrators and your insurance company is going to be important. We'll be talking about how you track information during an incident, because you may have short and long-term things going on. You want to track people, numbers, locations of boxes. It's all very important to have that kind of control over your data. And then I kind of already said this, just remember it's okay to get through it at whatever rate best you can. These things take time. So quickly I'm going to talk about recovery. Again, once your emergency is ended, the fire is out, the roof is not leaking anymore, whatever that may be, recovering your damaged materials is going to rely on the decisions that we made in our disaster plan, knowing what you can do in-house versus what you're going to need to send out to a professional shop or a vendor for. I think it's useful to think through those vendor decisions ahead of time, knowing that you can dry out a couple of books on your own, but if you have 100,000 wet books, probably not. But if they're circulating books, they're textbooks, then throw them out and buy new ones. And we can talk through those decision processes now, not when you're standing looking at a ruined library. Depending on the size and nature of your disaster, it may take weeks, months, years to recover. This is the 50th anniversary of the Great Flood of Turin. Of Florence. That's funny. Which we sort of look to as like the birth of modern conservation, is the flood of Florence. That film's been kind of making the rounds this year. You may have heard about it. So this huge flood occurred in Florence. It destroyed 40% of the archives and museums holdings in the area. Farmers from the Alps drove down into the city and packed trucks with like hundreds of thousands of wet books and manuscripts. They drove them back up into the mountains above the frost line and froze them in like sheds and like goat sheds and farms. They are still working on that material. They're still thawing it and cleaning it and restoring it. And it's okay, it's coming back. You know, paper freezes really well. So no rush, I would say, on your recovery. Quickly, I'm trying to go fast here, oh boy. So your recovery activities should start with what your priorities are. You don't want to say, oh my gosh, okay, we have all these wet books, let's just each grab a box and take care of it. Like, no, know where your more important photographs are, know where your organizational records are that you can't replace. If there are letters, unique objects, know that you're going to work on them first. A lot of these kind of salvage decisions will have to do with how much material you have, like I was saying before. Couple of wet items, 5, 10, 100 wet things, that's okay, we can handle that. 50,000 wet photographs, you cannot handle. It's just going to be too hard. You have to look for professional help, and the help is out there. I've got some resources in the folder about that. So quickly here. So just some basic guidelines with drying. Basically, when something is wet or burned, but mostly wet here, we're going to think about, you need to know what it's wet with. People will call me and say, well, my things are wet. And I'm like, what got them wet? What kind of water? Where is the water from? Because again, I'm thinking personal safety first. If you don't know if the water is clean or not, you have to be doing the full personal protective equipment, PPE, your gloves, your respirator, your smock, whatever those supplies you may have, because contaminants get carried in water really easily, especially during a flood, so something to be aware of. If it's clean water, first of all, obviously discarding. You will be getting rid of things during an emergency. You cannot save it all. It's just the nature of the beast. There are different drying processes for different materials. Air drying is a great option for a lot of things, but it's slow and it's time intensive. You can vacuum freeze dry things, you can regular freeze dry them. There kind of are some specific breakdowns for conditions and how you want to treat them. Leather, for example, and wood don't freeze well, they're going to get dried out. So before you say, okay, she said that we can freeze them all, put them in the freezer, double check. I have some lists of kind of guides of how do I dry this thing, and it gets real specific, and I've got those linked also in your handout. Air drying is great if you have a couple of dozen wet things. All you need is air. Don't turn the heat up. Don't try to compress them. You want to just have a couple of tables to spread out. This is where your kind of regional partnerships can come in place. If you know that the VFW hall has a bunch of extra tables you can use, get some plastic. You can get just like rolls of plastic from Home Depot. Stand out your books to dry. That's great. It takes time. It is exhausting physical labor. So be warned. It's not like, oh, well, we can just dry everything ourselves. Like, it takes a lot of time. Your risk of mold may increase. I haven't really talked about mold yet, actually, amazingly. I feel like I talk about mold. No, I talked about mold during our digital workshop. Mold is everywhere. It's common. It's a cumulative exposure concern, so the more you're exposed to it, the more sensitized you are to it, the stronger your reaction will be. If you have any kind of existing respiratory conditions, like me right now, I should not be around mold. We think it's common because you see it in the fridge or you see it on like the drywall in the basement, but it is actually quite a significant health hazard. So if you have some moldy books or photographs, whatever it may be, especially on organic materials, organic artifacts attract mold, attract pests. They love to eat cellulose and paper. They love to eat the straw in our baskets. It's such an issue if you have natural collections or historic preservation concerns in your structures. Just be mindful of it. You do want to take it seriously. A lot of the products out there that say, bleach wipes to kill mold, don't have bleach in them, don't kill mold. If you're trying to treat a moldy outbreak, I would say do a little research first. Make sure you're using a product that's actually safe for you and safe for your collections. Besides straight bleach, there is not an alternative to what's going to kill mold. But freezing it is a really good stabilizer, and it will give you kind of like press the pause button on it. So when you're air drying and things are starting to look a little bit green or gray or red or yellow, because it can come in every color, press that pause button, put it in the freezer, and make some better decisions about the environment in which you're drying. And we do not freeze quite a lot of things. Definitely our glass materials, our oil paintings. Sometimes fabrics can have some issues with freezing, but specifically like an oil painting is going to crack quite a lot. And by mag media, I mean our VHS, our audio reels. There are some debates around how cold you can keep them, but we definitely don't want to freeze them. All right, so what I've done, some of you, well, may be familiar with D-Plan, the online disaster planning template. That's its full name. So in like 94 or something, my company, NEDCC, got a grant from IMLS and I think like CoStep and a bunch of other acronyms to create a useful online digital disaster planning tool. It looks like it's from 1994. It's a great tool. It is a strong tool. But when you print it out, it prints out to be like around 200 pages, and a lot of the pages are just kind of corrupted code. So it's a little bit rough right now. So what I have made is this 25-page version of it. And you can take this, and you can fill in the blanks, and you can delete parts of it you want. If you want the Microsoft Word like doc, email me, I'll send it to you. You can change all the words in it. You can change the fonts. Get rid of the stuff that's not useful for you. The idea is that this is a really easy tool. You can take all the information that you have already. We're gonna put it in a binder. We're gonna put it in a folder. This is not like a tome, a thesis that we're creating, like the disaster planning Bible of all time. Like this is something that you do. We're gonna knock it out. We're gonna check on it in 6 months. You know, this should not be like a life and death thing. Hopefully. Okay, so we're gonna go through this pretty quickly and casually because I think that's how our disaster planning should be. I like to think of it as a resource assessment. Who and what do you have in place to help you when something happens? We've just thought through a lot of kind of formal steps of emergency management and assessing our needs. Whether all of those produce an answer for you, we'll see. But hopefully these chapters are sort of more real, more accessible. It's easy to plug in the information for you. For policies to be effective, they have to be published. That's pretty standard, right? So if you want to make effective policies, you want to write them down. Producing a physical plan like a binder or a folder, it's a tangible tool that can be shared. You can go and get it and talk about it. It's a nice way to gather your thoughts physically. Usually these are not going to be public facing. These are going to be a few people will have them in their offices, or maybe the head volunteer has a copy. Because disasters can happen at any time, but mostly seem to happen like Saturdays at 2 a.m. over a holiday weekend, you want to have a copy of this at your house probably. Sometimes I know some emergency managers who have a copy in their car. I think that's kind of intense. I think you can probably drive and get it, but it depends on the emergency. So it's something we're going to make it, we're going to have a few people in charge of it. So picture your binder. There's basically a table of contents here, and we're going to talk through each of these chapters. And they're just kind of little pools of information, and then we're done. So the forms require a lot of information. You might need to spend some time collecting information and people's emails and phone numbers, and it may be several times before you come back to this. What I like to do is set up a meeting with whoever's going to be on my team, and we'll talk about that. Take out the staple, start handing out sections. Be like, okay, you're going to handle this, the custodian will handle this, and the vice president will handle this, and our volunteers will handle this. And you come back in 2 weeks, and you check on everyone's stuff, and then you come back in 2 weeks after that, and then you're done. So share it. We'll talk about teams and team roles. But really, do email me. I'm so happy to, or make sure I get yours, and I'll email you the doc of it so you can play with it. First section, pretty straightforward. We're going to choose someone to be the contact for disaster plans, so the person who's in charge of harrying everyone to make them fill out their forms and hand them back in to you. It's probably going to be you since you're the one sitting here. Obviously, you care enough to be here right now. So that's pretty straightforward. See, section B, we're already into another section. Section B is going to be our disaster planning committee. This is not your disaster response team. We've got this set up as two separate entities because sometimes your administrative group may want to make the decisions, but your response team may be the people who live closest, the people who have keys, the people who are working the most hours and have the most availability to it. You can have the same people on both your teams. They can both be two people, and it's you and the other guy, and that's it, and that's fine. But if you have a large organization or more people who want to get involved, it's okay to break up this planning side and response side. So you're going to have some administrative personnel, maybe members of your board, maybe a town administrator. It's nice to have maybe someone from outside the organization who has a little bit of a different perspective, maybe a local first responder. If you're part of a campus system or a municipal system, it's very likely that you have someone already in the area who likes to talk about this stuff, who has expertise, who has a bunch of their own flyers they want to share with you. That's great. Bring them in. And even if you are plugged into another broader system, like if you're on a campus and there's definitely a campus-wide emergency plan, it's okay. You still want to have your own policies for your building and for your collection. I even encourage, like, when there is a little one-room archives in a bigger library, the archives can have their own disaster plan. And maybe you don't worry about including, like, all of the technical building information, but still do the planning, do the thinking about it. We'll talk about roles and responsibilities for your planning committee. Again, this is pretty formal, but it's a great place to start when you're having your meeting to talk about this, to say, well, what do we care? What do we do here? Well, here's what they should be doing. Section C is we're going to go into some detail about our building systems. So we're going to want input of your building manager, of your custodian. And it does not matter if you have like a sophisticated HVAC system or if you have an air conditioning unit that you plug in, but only on the hottest day because it's so expensive. That's okay. Getting a little bit of information about that to put in your plan here is great for whoever is in the building when something happens. And again, we don't want people taking this and flying off the handle with this information. That's why we do training around it. Turning off a major facilities system is only being done during an actual emergency. So do training around that. If you have multiple buildings also, maybe you have two, like a storage location and a central office building, that's okay too. You can pull out this page and make copies of it. This is all about customization here. So this is just a baseline for you guys to get started with. Again, we've talked about this, having a good understanding of your building systems or having someone that you know who understands them. Get that information recorded. I think that having buy-in from your facilities person or HVAC guy is so important. They are your building's historian. They are your local expert, and you want them to be on your side. If you've never talked to your custodian or you don't actually know who comes in and changes light bulbs and stuff, find out, ask, go talk to that person because they are probably much more aware of possible risks. You know, maybe they've noticed a leak or they've noticed something that doesn't work too well. They're going to help you out. They want to help you protect this building. So I think the disaster prep really has to start with whoever's in charge of your building and getting that partnership going. It's really like a big kind of an outreach thing. And local politics is hard, I get it, but starting the dialogue somewhere is important. Section D is about digital assets. You definitely have things sitting on computers, sitting on servers, sitting in private email accounts or like an old database somewhere. So finding out who's your contact information, who do you call to get help with these systems. Maybe you're lucky and you have an IT department, probably not. We don't, so many people don't. But so who helps you set up your computers? Are you part of a shared backup system? You know, does the city back it up, and if so, where? Make sure you know necessary procedures about passwords, that information. Of course, that's very sensitive information. So again, our disaster plan shouldn't be like sitting out at a desk somewhere where anyone can grab it. I guess also just thinking, you could include, if you have someone who's good with computers, who you rely on for your IT or for your systems admin, have them on your disaster planning committee. There'll be another sort of fresh perspective to include. Section E, this is your insurance. Maybe you have a blanket insurance policy for your building and everything in it. Maybe you have collections insurance. Maybe you've got nothing, but find out what you have. Put some information down about that. This might be something that your administrator says, well, we've taken care of that, don't worry about it. If you can get a little bit more information than that, that's useful because, again, if it's in the middle of the night or on a weekend, you're going to want to be able to make this call yourself. Yes, so this is probably a place where your administrator is going to want to be involved. Again, let them be on the planning committee. They don't have to be on the response committee unless they live close by or they have like a really good pair of rubber boots and they like want to get in there. So, moving on to section 2, response and recovery, and you'll see that these kind of reflect those stages of emergency management that we talked about earlier. This is your real meat and potatoes of your plan here. So it starts with your actual response team. Now think about what collections you have in your building that might be affected. Do you have special formats? Do you have a lot of organic artifacts or textiles or audiovisual materials that you're going to want someone who's familiar with those formats so that they come in and they're going to focus on those things right away? Do you have someone with extensive knowledge of the building? Again, your facilities person here, you want them on your response team. Thinking about someone who can talk to the press or to neighboring institutions, do outreach to your community. A little kind of PR action is often necessary if it's a major incident, if we're talking about like a bigger incident than just someone getting sick or just the window breaking. Having that person to do your outreach there is important. This is all really about contact information. You're going to want to have the right contact information and know who you can call, who you can text, who's going to always be on their email, for example. I never answer a phone call, but you can email me 24/7. And so you just find that ahead of time, make a note of it. Again, often you're part of a larger plan for your town or your overarching organization, and they're going to say, oh, well, there's just the facilities person, or we just have this phone number for all your systems. Find out who it actually is who answers that phone. Get a little bit more kind of title information. And again, a breakdown of roles and responsibilities per team. If this is just you and one other person, you can go ahead and delete all the other fields and don't worry about it. But hopefully this gives you a nice baseline for your conversation. Who do we need to know? What are we going to be doing, etc. Disaster planning is a team activity, so think about who's doing your response with you. People get tired, people wander off, people take on too much for themselves. So find out who's going to be there helping you out and stay on top of them. This is just a phone list. Again, you probably already have this. It's easy to put that together. We're thinking about people who live close, people who will be willing to show up in the middle of the night. In your folder, there's a magnet. There should be a magnet. I'm pretty sure I put magnets in all the folders. That is a 24/7 federally funded hotline that you can call. I have the phone. It's in my bag. One of us will always answer it, a field agent like me, someone in the office. You were having a flood or a fire or found some mold or whatever, you can call us. I tell people don't call when your building's on fire. Call me the next day because I'm not going to show up, but I will help you talk about your vendors. We can talk about, sometimes people are just freaking out. We want to just talk through it, but sometimes they're like, here's what we're doing. I had a phone call yesterday morning from Albion, Michigan. They had a series of books get wet in a high school, and they put them into their scientific grade freezer at 80 degrees, negative 80 degrees. And I was like, yeah, they're good. That is really frozen. And we talked about how he's going to now remove them from the freezer because they're so cold. They're going to the water goes straight from wet to a gaseous form, and then it's going to condensate. So you can call us. Put that magnet somewhere visible, share it. Don't hesitate to call. Even if you're just trying to set up some contracts or get some supplies, we're happy to talk through it. Salvage priorities here, oh my gosh, flying through this. So this is a little bit more complicated, probably thinking about what are the most important records for you to continue your operations, whether that's checking books out to patrons or scheduling events on a calendar. Know what those important records are. Know your collection priorities, thinking about the most important artifacts or documents that you guys own. This can be a difficult discussion, right? What's most important? I try not to use the word important or valuable when I'm talking to people about their collections because it depends on what your own priorities are. It depends on your own mission statement. But talking through that, it's a good collections management exercise anyway. There are some people who say you should label your most important boxes. Put a glow-in-the-dark sign on them, put a special X on them that you know that it means most valuable. People think that's a good guide for evacuating materials during an emergency. People think it's also a shopping list for thieves. So make that decision. 80% of thefts in historic collections and museums are internal thefts. So maybe you don't want to label everything that's most important. At least you don't want to mark it on your floor plan. I don't want you to tell me where your most valuable objects are on a floor plan because I'm going to take it and break in at night, right? So be aware of your security risks alongside these kind of protocols. Thinking about what's really irreplaceable, less unique, more unique as we go towards the right. And don't forget about your digital assets. Sometimes things are better just to get, you just throw them out, buy new ones. But if it's a really expensive reference textbook or it's an archival letter or something, you can't buy a new one. So making those decisions. We talked about what you can do in-house versus what you can do with a vendor. Some things you can dry and take care of yourself. Some things you should not try to dry, and you should call a vendor. Try and get a grant. There's example material up here you can look at for that. Evacuation priorities, again, we're thinking about how you remove yourselves first before you remove your collections from the building. If you have a floor plan, you can attach it. This is our floor plan, actually, of our offices. So it's a good place to plug that into your disaster plan. And then think about a temporary command center. Is there a place where you can go and open up and have a table or have some computers if you need to for a couple of weeks? Last piece is supplies and services, non-staff personnel, your materials that you're going to be using during your response and your recovery. Things like this list is exhaustive, okay? This is almost like too crazy. You may not have all the, there's like a locksmith and plumber, all the roles. You may not have all those things. That's okay. But if you have them, plug them in. It's like a personalized yellow pages. This is going to be a useful thing. Even if you don't do the rest of it, it's a useful guide for yourselves because you won't be like looking for the scrap of paper where the guy wrote down the electrician's phone number. Just put it in a new piece of like, we do that. It's like, no, just write it down. Number 3 here are recovery services. There are services who are going to clean out your moldy basement. They should not be the ones cleaning your historic artifacts. There's kind of a distinction in the fields there. So ask around, get your vendors, and put them in here beforehand. All 3 of the main 3, Belfour, PMS, BMS Cat, and Polygon have free membership programs. If you call them, they'll come out to your buildings, they'll walk around with you, they'll put you on a list. So if a tornado goes through your town, you're on the top of the list. And if you need like a freezer truck, they'll come talk to you first. Call us. Examples of supplies are in here. Just like, again, start small, get a couple of basic supplies in place. You can add to it as you want, but then label it and close it. You don't want people like stealing your Sharpies and your batteries. Like this is just for disasters. Funding is really important. You may need to know who's allowed to use the credit card, how you can get extra funding, how do you apply for grants. Once you get it all in there, review it. Find who's got copies, and then check on it in a year. If you have new hires, if you change buildings, that's an excuse to do it, but otherwise you should be reviewing it once a year. Do a great job. Don't have a fire. Call us if you have a problem. Thanks so much. And I'm happy to hang out and talk more. I know you guys probably have sessions to go to, but I think if someone else comes in, I'll leave. But happy to hang out and take questions if you guys have them.